I was quite interested this morning. I thought Steve Vallis put it very well, where he said Australia is well placed, but potentially at risk of falling behind. So I'm quite keen to understand what we're seeing in the broader Asia Pacific region. So Stephen, given your remit is across Asia Pac and Japan, what trends are you seeing throughout the region in terms of adoption and the sorts of use cases that you're seeing?
Yeah, thank you. So happy to share. Firstly, for those that don't know VMware, VMware is a very large software engineering company, 35,000 people globally, 13,000 plus engineers, 10,000 people across Asia Pacific. So I think for VMware to enter this market in itself is certainly a huge step. So my remit includes ANZ, but a big focus of mine is across larger Asian markets and also supporting the teams globally. We're seeing a lot of focus at the moment. I mean, fundamentally, the VMware role is really to help organizations be successful. We see technology as an enabler, but we see the fact that for these technologies to be applied for enterprise-grade businesses, or so my boss eloquently shares, bank-grade expectations, there's a lot of fundamental requirements. And our role is really to help organizations get to production quickly at a more commercial, sustainable point than I guess historically is possible. And in fact, what I would share though is, before I touch on, what ASX are doing here in relation to the complexity in terms of the intrinsic part of their business process, in terms of their scale and performance, is really second to none. So we certainly have a fantastic example of global leading innovation, but I certainly would share at the moment, certainly from my focus, a lot of time is spent in countries or geos, from Singapore, Malaysia, in Greater China, you name it. These markets are very ambitious. They're looking at smart cash adoption. They're looking at new asset classes, very driven by obviously revenue creation. And I think a lot of them also have the ambition to create centers of excellence, really lead the region around, I guess, technology leadership. So we're also seeing a lot of focus in government as well in some markets. So I think Singapore is well known. Canada is extremely well known. We've got things like Opal cards, digital driver's license. You can see we're going down this path. And I would certainly say at the moment that certain regions are certainly ahead of us. But I think we've made such huge inroads here. We just need to keep matching that ambition. And I would say the role of large enterprise software companies is to help with that technology leadership. We know that journey is not easy. So I think for us, a lot of it is around education versus selling. And I think we need to be really genuine with organizations as to what is the real business problem. And I think based on real credibility, we'll continue to see adoption versus proof of concepts.
So just following on from that, so far we've talked a lot about financial services. So Stephen, are you seeing in other sectors, are you seeing actual implementations occurring beyond POCs in other sectors, and which sectors are you seeing that kind of activity?
Yes, we are. So certainly things like shared registries. So we really go back to the value. When you've got organizations with disparate data, reconciliation is challenging, it's inefficient, but ultimately revenue, customer experience drives adoption. So organizations that want to create new products and services to their markets. So I would say government is heavily in there. We all know how horrible those experiences can be when we go to one entity versus another. We've all got our Opal cards, we've got our digital driver's license, yet we still go into one entity and it's, who are you, please, sir? We're also seeing a lot of other organizations wanting to get access to that data. So why should it be that entity alone, for example? Otherwise you're open to fraud and you're open to these other elements. So Singapore is a well-known public example of that. We all see this. Canada is doing some really interesting things. I would say healthcare is another big one, certainly in America, where they're quite, I would say, dysfunctional even in relation to the state, not really sharing a lot with others, although there's legislation around that now. So to get entities to a shared source of truth is tremendously of value. Supply chain, we're seeing that. I'm seeing a lot in gaming as well at the moment. So organizations looking at how do I ensure all the different businesses I run, my consumers have a consistent experience and they get loyalty rewards and things of that nature. So, I have to be reserved in terms of stealing thunder from organizations, but I will say without a shadow of a doubt, you're going to see a lot of big announcements, particularly across Asia, which I see as leading. You're going to see some big announcements in Europe as well. And you're going to continue to see America, I think, lag, but they will still be progressing. So Australia's made huge inroads to start, but I think we need to keep that momentum or we will be left behind.
So just following on from that theme around government, I think in the course of this week, we're speaking a lot about government as a policy, as a setter of policy and regulation. I'm curious, Vivek, I might pass to you and pose the question to you in terms of government as a utilizer of DLT solutions and looking to actually implement. What are you seeing? I've heard some state governments in India are quite forward-looking. Stephen's already touched on Singapore and Canada. Vivek, what are you seeing?
Gaurav, globally, what we are saying is that the government enablement is very good, right? I think the recognition from the government and the ability to differentiate between DLT or blockchain as a technology and cryptocurrency is very clearly there, because governments have a role in regulation. The central banks have a role in how they decide between the usage of CBDCs and cryptocurrencies. So governments are clearly understanding now that the technology has a lot of power. They need to leverage it. It can be for various aspects, on what you can call as the government supply chain. It can be for digital identity, land records. So in terms of facilitation, in terms of a deeper understanding of what the technology can offer as we look into the future, I think governments are, farther ahead than what one would expect, if I can say that. I think they are even driving it, pushing it, compared to how private enterprise or institutions sometimes look to use it and, in a sense, sometimes dabble with it. I think governments are very clear about where they will apply it. So I think there is a lot of positive on the government side, which is good because it takes away some of the negativity that has come because of the hype cycle, right? I think we have to accept that there is a certain amount, because there was probably too much of hype, let's say 4 years back, and everybody was talking trillions, not even billions. When you have that kind of thinking, then from there naturally you get to a point where there is a certain level of what happened here, a certain level of disillusionment, difficulty in creating business cases. So in some of the areas, in a lot of countries, governments paving the way, helps cut away from the clutter, have the confidence that they can move forward with the technology, not get caught up with the cryptocurrency. So I think we are in a good place as far as government enablement is concerned. A lot of times when a particular regulator does not approve a specific type of market or cryptocurrency, it gets a lot of profile. But I think we should step back a little bit from that. I would say that the way in which governments are facilitating and how that goes into the mainstream is very, very promising. And that augurs well for the next couple of years. Globally.
Yeah. So I'm quite curious in terms of the sorts of projects that we're seeing adopted. Danielle, I might pose the question to you. Are the projects we're seeing, are they very much internally focused on internal workflows for large companies, or are they more, ecosystem type solutions where it involves their clients and other players and partners?
So it can be both, I guess, insofar as you can start internal, but I think ultimately value is at the ecosystem level. It's one of the ways you can move forward with adoption. So bringing ecosystem partners working in close collaboration in a tight group and then expanding into the ecosystem is one way to do it. And our private equity blockchain was an example of that. We delivered an end-to-end lifecycle flow. We had lawyers, regulators, and auditors in that lifecycle, as well as the funds and investors. Once that was developed, proved out in production, then we licensed it as a software provider to expand the ecosystem. So now we can bring in peers and competitors into the ecosystem to leverage that capability. So I do think it has to sort of be outward looking to really leverage the workflow benefits of the data and some of the immutability benefits of the technology. So I think though you can start internal, but vision to external, and the ecosystem has to be there.
And Scott.
I would second that, Gaurav. Sorry to interrupt. I would second what Danielle just said. I think the big value comes in ecosystems, and the fact that ecosystems are not so easy to create, needs a lot of people to come together is what is going to be the challenge for a lot of us to tackle together. That's what I thought I will add to what Danielle just mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So Scott, I might just pass to you. Curious to see, in terms of barriers to adoption, what are you seeing? Is it simply that finding the correct use case is a challenge? Is it, at the executive decision-making level, they're just not, aware of the technology and the benefits, or perhaps it has a bad reputation and the understanding isn't there, or is it the challenge of interoperability? What are the barriers? And
I think one of the things that's difficult for enterprise to really get the right balance out of is the sort of the interrelationship between the technology, the sort of the regulatory environment that you're operating in, and then then the broader community as well. And really making sure that they're nice and in sync. And I often sort of, when I'm talking to enterprise and I try and move away from talking about the technology, I sort of try and think about cars, and just because I've got a brand new Tesla, I still need to drive that and operate that within the laws of driving on the road. And so I look at the technology, just because it can do something, really doesn't mean that it should. I think often I see a lot of organizations and a lot of conversations leading with the technology rather than, as Steve sort of mentioned, what's the real business problem? If you focus on the business problem and really hone in on that, understand that, and then think about the technology. And at the end of the day, the answer to your business problem may not actually be a blockchain solution. And really, ultimately, any technology, it doesn't operate and live in isolation of just fundamental economics. So part of the business problem is, what's the size of the problem? And then what's the relativity of that problem to the cost of my solution to give me a really clear ROI? And so I think, people often sort of struggle getting the right balance between the economics of different solutions, and then the balance between those three key things: regulation, technology, and the broader community or the ecosystem that you're operating in.
Look, I completely agree, but I do say I think the role fundamentally of vendors in this world we now live in is to deliver thought leadership. The roles of the VMwares of the world, our role is actually to help organizations get to their business goals quickly with less cost. Historically, blockchain projects are all custom built, very hard to support, and never going to cut the mustard related to enterprise grade businesses. That said, I would certainly say legacy has certainly been holding back businesses for a long period of time. We've got mainframes still stuck intrinsically in business process, and they will be for a long period of time. But I think what I'm really seeing, and I can kind of touch on a few examples, businesses looking to create revenue. When organizations start thinking, how do I deliver greater value to my customers? How do I create new products and services? All of a sudden, we've got a lot more momentum. And they're probably the organizations that are adopting the technology. There's one we'll talk tomorrow that will probably touch on some of the work they're doing in the US. There's other banks rolling out additional products and services to regions, economies in Asia they could never have in the past. The technology is fundamentally fantastic, but it is only an enabler to a vision. So I think I would encourage everyone to keep looking what's happening globally. There are really exciting things there, but ultimately, it's not creating new revenue. I think a lot of these programs will struggle to surface, or in relation to government driving that better citizen experience. Thank you.
So we've just got a couple of minutes before we wrap. I'm curious just to explore the view of Australia. Where does Australia sit compared to our global peers? So Vivek, as the only person here who kind of can give us an outsider's view, could you just give us a very quick sense of where you think Australia sits within our region in terms of adoption, and what you're seeing from Australian corporates in the work that you do? 2 minutes before we wrap.
you, Gaurav. I thought you will put me on the spot there by asking me as the one person to comment on Australia. Yeah, but I think Australia is seen as one of the countries that is in a sense ahead of the curve. I would say there is a lot of interest on the ASX and the ASX project when it comes to financial services. There is also an understanding that when it comes to you could say cutting edge technology, embracing technology ahead of the curve. There is a good feel about what can be done. A lot of our customers, global custodians, for example, are looking to see what we can do for them when it comes to enablement of coexistence with blockchain ecosystems in Australia. So if I were to see what do our global custodians, I'm just taking an example because our global custodians go to 50 different countries with us. Then Australia is in the top 5 in terms of where they are seeing, embracing blockchain technology.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vivek. And I think we're out of time here. So I know this is a really fascinating topic. We could talk about this forever, but I would like to thank all of our panelists for their insights and candor this afternoon. And thank you to Blockchain Australia for organising the event, and then onwards to the next session, and enjoy the rest of Blockchain Week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Pleasure to connect with all of you virtually. Thank you.